Good afternoon. What a great day we have ahead of us. We'll just wait for a couple of people to come in. Come in, take a seat. It is my absolute pleasure and privilege to be able to open Professor Sarah Williams' inaugural Professorial lecture. For those of you that I haven't met, and I have now met you, actually, my name's Jermaine Valle. I'm one of the other Pro-Vice-Chancellors here at BNU. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the kind of backstory to the person we're here to celebrate. So Sarah has already had not just one, but two successful careers, which is a little bit greedy, but we'll leave that. She first conquered the world of public relations, leading agency teams and running her own consultancy, but she decided that wasn't quite enough, so she turned to higher education. Since she's been in HE, she's been climbing that academic ladder as rapidly as she did in the PR world. So Sarah began teaching PR and marketing in 2004 back at the University of Wolverhampton, which is the very university she graduated from. She brought her industry experience into the classroom long before it was trendy and has been blended theory and practice ever since. In 2010, she moved to Manchester Met, where she juggled course leadership and program development alongside a young family, because why do one full-time job when you can have however many? She then returned back to Wolves in 2013 and quickly became a senior examiner for the Chartered Institute of Marketing. From there, whirlwind of promotions, principal lecturer, head of department, associate director, associate dean, and director of the business school. If there was a leadership role going, Sarah probably had it, and let's face it, she bossed it. So in 2022, she joined us here as head of the business and law school. And within months, she transformed the school, boosting student satisfaction, doubling the staff base, and even relocating the entire school. She's found time to become Principal Fellow of the HEA, and that's one of the highest recognitions you can get for teaching leadership. And in last year as well, was also awarded her professorship. And just when we thought she might take a bit of a break, she was promoted again to Pro-Vice-Chancellor External Collaborations earlier this year. She now leads all things partnerships, engagement, international. Basically, if it's happening outside of BNU, Sarah probably leads it. But alongside this, she remains committed to her research, publishing on everything from gender and professionalism in PR to the joys and fears of AI in the classroom. Her work is thoughtful, relevant, and is always rooted in real-life experience. Sarah is a first-generation scholar, a strategic leader, a passionate educator, and is a tireless advocate for inclusive, industry-connected learning. She's also, and I can say this as somebody who's worked with Sarah for the last year and a half, a bit of a whirlwind. If you've ever tried to keep up with her and the things she's doing, you'll know what I mean. So tonight, we're not just celebrating a professorship, we're celebrating a career built on a vision, on a drive. You can sit at the front if you want to. On a vision and drive and genuine love for people and education. So what makes this so special is the fact that family and friends can come and celebrate the pinnacle of academic life. So Sam, Sarah's son, Jackie and Roy, mum and dad, are here to celebrate with us. I know we're missing Max, your other son, but we are so glad you could be here. I know you will be, but you should be immensely proud of what we're doing here today. So, I was about to wrap up my little opening address there, and I'd saved it. I was on my way to the printer, checked my phone, and I got an email from Sarah literally an hour ago. When I said that the inaugural professorial lecture is kind of the pinnacle of academic life, I was right, but what was in that email was probably a very close second. Sarah's been nominated for an honorary doctorate from the International University College in Malaysia called Spectrum. The nomination came directly from the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for the recognition of her outstanding and transformative contribution to HE in the UK. Well done, Sarah.
Thank you.
So all of us in the audience, please join me in welcoming the inspirational Professor Sarah Williams.
Thanks, Jermaine. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. I don't quite know how I would top that, really. So I'm not going to. I'm just going to take you through some of my research. But I wanted to start off really with a little bit of a background to me. And Jermaine's covered quite a lot of it already. But yeah, this is my second career. So I started as a language graduate. So I'm a modern languages graduate. I have French and Spanish degree. I studied in France and Spain, spent some time living in those countries, and then somehow ended up with a career in communications and public relations. And they sound like they're not connected, but they really are quite connected. Because I think what drove me to do languages is what drove me to do comms, and it's wanting to work with people and wanting to be around people. So that's where I started. And I honestly thought that's where I would end up. I didn't think that I would ever do anything but PR and comms. I loved it. It was really exciting, it's really energetic. I worked in Birmingham and in London, and I loved it. Loved working in agencies, loved agency life, loved everything about it. And then Sam came along. So Sam came along in 2003, not your fault, not to blame you for anything. But when Sam came along in 2003, I realised that actually I didn't want that pace of life anymore. I couldn't have that pace of life, and I wanted to spend time with Sam. And one of the defining moments in that was that the then head of the agency I was working for called me in to remind me that the PR division that I was leading at that time, that was my baby. And I thought, no, Sam is my baby. And I redirected. And actually, when I left that career, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have anything to go to. I thought I might do a bit of freelance, as everybody does. And then an opportunity to teach PR at Wolverhampton University came up. And I never even knew that was something you could do. I never thought for a minute you could teach PR. I went for the job, got it, and as they say, the rest is history. I give you that context because that really was the inspiration for a lot of the research that I've ended up doing. And you know, as I go through the rest of the presentation, you'll see what I mean. Because my experiences as a woman working in public relations in the 1990s, yes, it was exhilarating, yes, it was fun, yes, it was exciting, but there were also lots of downsides to that industry. There was lots of toxic elements to that industry. And as I got older, and was able to reflect on those experiences, it really fueled, I suppose, my injustice and my anger at the way that women were treated in the industry in the 1990s and still here in 2025. And that has fueled a lot of my research. So just to give you a bit of a potted history of my research journey, I started off by looking at continuous professional development. I wanted to do something that connected what I was doing at the time, teaching, with what I'd come from, which was professional practice, and I did some research into continuous professional development. The bit of that caught my eye was professional and professionalism and professionalisation. And so I spent a number of years looking at that, and in fact, you know, I started my PhD and never finished it, but I started my PhD in professionalism and professionalisation. And that's kind of evolved because although so if I go back to 2017, I wrote a chapter that talked about professionalism and how people enact professional behaviours. And there was a lot in that was quite interesting, but the most fascinating aspects of that for me were how women in particular enacted professional behaviours and how they changed themselves in some way to suit their environment, and they became sometimes less than in order to fit in. And again, I have quite a strong sense of injustice, and that really fueled my sense of injustice and has led me to where I am now, which is very much gender-focused research. And you know, one of the other projects I'm involved with, along with Adatoro, and I thought I saw Liana here, is the Women's Labour Project. Yes, you're there. I knew I'd seen you come in. the Women's Labour Project. So this is something that I feel really passionately about, as you'll probably see as we go through the rest of the presentation. So most of my research over the last couple of years has been really focused on gender, and specifically gender in public relations. And last year that culminated in the publication of a book which I co-authored with another member of staff here, although she wasn't at that time, Liz Bridgen, who unfortunately can't be here because she's setting up our Nottingham campus for us. But we wrote a book called Women's Work in Public Relations, and we are in the middle of writing the second volume of that book right now. So that's a bit of a potted history of me and how I got to this point in my career. And what I wanted to take you through now really is some highlights from that last book, and some of the things from my own research in that last book. And then I'll tell you a bit at the end about where it's going next, because I've got 3 other projects on the go, which I'll talk about at the end. And the picture in the middle there is just my latest chapter, which is not what I'm talking about today, but it's female practitioners again, but freelancers, because freelance is so big in public relations. So what I want to talk to you about today is women's lived experiences. How do women live their roles in public relations? How do they perform their roles? And what I was really interested in was this idea of performance. And, I've read quite a lot of Goffman's work. I don't know if anybody else has read quite a lot of Goffman's work here. And I was really interested in this idea of front of stage and back of stage. And that really resonated with me, because I think as women, and probably most people, but certainly women do this all the time. We have a persona that we put on when we're in our workplace environments, and that we take that persona off when we're not there. But we have so many different juggling, competing aspects to our lives that makes that performance even more complex. So within the research, I've identified 3 key stages. So Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Obviously, I worked in PR. I'm going to have to turn it into a pun at some point along the line. Act 1, preparation. Act 2, performance. And Act 3, receptions. How do people receive you? How do they see you? How do they understand your performances? So I'll go into this in a bit more detail later, but the preparation stage is all about how we train people, how we prepare people for their careers. How do women prepare for professional roles? Do they prepare for professional roles? Certainly in my experience and the experience of a lot of people that I've worked with, particularly in public relations, it's something you fall into. It's not necessarily something you prepare for. Certainly my generation. I think in the early 2000s, when PR degrees became super popular, we were starting to train and prepare people. But certainly in the 90s, you just did whatever and then stumbled into a career in PR. The performance element is about impression management, and that's what public relations is at its heart, right? It's about reputation, it's about managing people's perceptions, your impressions. And it's not just doing that for clients, which is the whole point of the career, but it's actually about how we do that for ourselves as well. So self-presentation, navigating those expectations. And then finally, how are we perceived? How are women in PR perceived? How are we evaluated? How are we judged by others? As I said earlier, I use Goffman's dramaturgical lens to sort of frame everything that I did, although I have actually looked at a couple of other theoretical concepts, which I won't bore you with, but I will just touch on in a minute. But I like this idea of performance as a metaphor, because it really does relate not only to all of us in our working lives and everything we do, but actually specifically to public relations, which is an image-focused, image-obsessed profession. Is it a profession? I mean, that's a whole other thing. But I could have done a whole hour on whether it's a profession or not. It's not, I don't think. So I looked at social interactions as theatrical performances because we're playing a role. We are managing impressions. We want people to think nicely and well of us. We present ourselves strategically in different situations. And a lot of time, particularly for women in public relations, they conform to expectations. And that is something that we'll look at a little bit later. So in the PR context, what this means is we're engaging in visible performance. So the public relations industry is all about visible performance. It's organising media relations, events, presentations, public appearances. I'm very conscious that there are at least 2 PR people in the room with me this evening, and you know what I mean, right? You know, we're constantly, that's part of the job, is to organise things, and you become actually quite expert at organising things because you're putting on events and you're organising press conferences and things all the time. So that's part of the role. But alongside that, you've got your own identity performance, how you are performing as an individual, and that's a lot more subtle. That's about how we present our professional self and why we present our professional self in that way. And that will always be linked to organisational and societal expectations. There were a couple of other intersecting theoretical lenses I mentioned earlier, so feminist theory and Foucauldian discourse. I will just briefly go over these because I don't know how well people understand some of these. And you're all from different disciplines, so you probably understand things on different levels. The bit of the feminist theory that particularly interested me was the Velvet Ghetto phenomenon. I don't know how many people here have heard of or understood the Velvet Ghetto phenomenon. Okay, so Velvet Ghetto is where you get a profession and occupation with high concentrations of women. And what happens when you have those professions, like nursing, like teaching, is like library services, is that they become, in a sense, deprofessionalised. Wages get lower, the status is considered less than, and actually the fact that more women do it than men actually in the end undermines it as a career choice, and public relations is very firmly in that arena. It's an occupation where 65% of the people who do public relations and communication are women, 35% are men. However, 35% of women are leaders in public relations and communications, and 65% of men are leaders. So it's completely reversed. Women don't make those leadership roles on the whole. You're a wonderful exception. But on the whole, they don't make that leap. They get stuck in technical roles. They get stuck in the writing the press releases and organising the events. They get stuck. And there are a number of reasons, and my research doesn't go into the reasons why they get stuck, although if you're interested, Liz Bridgen's research does go into the reasons why they get stuck. But they get stuck for a number of reasons. Family is often one of them, because when you are, as Jermaine said, when you're managing a family and managing a career, something has to give, and so you end up staying at those more technical roles so that you don't find yourself pulled into more strategic work. But also it's about the expectations of your performance and what limitations are placed on you. And Velvet Ghetto, the phenomenon of Velvet Ghetto really concerns itself with those limitations that are placed not just on women in general, but women in specific careers that then become marginalised in themselves. The other thing that came out really loud and clear, and I know myself from my own experience and my own professional behaviours, is the friendliness trap. Women get caught in a friendliness trap where they want to be friendly to everybody, and they want, they want everybody to kind of be comforted in their presence and feel comfortable in their presence, and so they change how they behave and how they feel in certain scenarios in order to ensure somebody else's comfort. And that's damaging to their own careers, ultimately, in the long run. Then from Foucauldian discourse, I think the key things there for me are around governmentality and self-regulation. So this isn't something that anybody ever said to me when I went to work in an agency. Nobody stood there and said, right, I want you to dress this way, I want you to do this, I want you to be this. This is how you've got to be around a client. Nobody said these things. These were unsaid, they were unwritten rules. And you police yourself. So the governmentality thesis, Foucault's governmentality thesis says that we police ourselves. We control ourselves, we place limits on ourselves according to the scenarios because we know what society or what organisation expects from us in that moment. So governmentality thesis was something that was really important. And actually, I kind of used that years ago in my first piece of research on continuous professional development. So that theoretical bit has stuck with me for years. So I'll move on. So Velvet Ghetto. In the early 80s, a lady called Elizabeth Toth wrote a fantastic book. Oh, you know Elizabeth Toth? No, you were smiling then, Rachel. I thought you knew her work. Elizabeth Prof is an American scholar, and she wrote a book on the Velvet Ghetto in public relations in the early 1980s. And I'm horrified to tell you that nothing has changed. In the intervening 40 years, not a single thing has changed. So when we looked at the Velvet Ghetto now, everything that was being said about women's role in the public relations and communications industry in the early 80s stands now. And in some areas, some bits of it have actually pulled back a little bit. And what was interesting in the book is that we intersperse our academic chapters with some practitioner stories. And we had a practitioner story from a lady called Bron Eames, who was a very, very senior PR practitioner in the Midlands. And she and a number of other women of her generation, she won't mind me saying, Bron's in her mid-60s, they were saying actually how they'd had a lot of help from men in the industry in the early stage of their career, that they'd had a lot of support and a lot of help. By the early 90s, that had dried up. So there was a real movement in the 70s and early 80s to help women get on in their careers, and that just sort of dried up in the early 90s and hasn't really ever resumed. So that kind of change, what looked like it was going to be change in the early 80s, didn't materialise. It didn't turn into anything. So we have these women now concentrated in lower paying technical positions, and men are dominating, as I said, the higher level decision-making roles. And some of these manifestations in practice are around things like the friendliness trap. We're expected to be polite, to be servile, to be bubbly, to be always on. You know, we're the ones that are organising things, smiling, yeah, no problem, I'll do that for you. Yeah, leave that with me, I'll pick that up. And that's just expected of women. And I'm going to say, like, that's not just PR. Because I'm looking at some of the women in the room and I'm thinking, yep, you do it, and you do it, and you do it, and you do it. We all do it, right? It's just, it's part of the trap that we fall into. But there are stereotypes in public relations, you know, the PR bunny stereotype that have persisted for many decades and still go on. You know, I had the misfortune to be a young blonde woman working in public relations in the early 90s, and the perceptions were very much, well, of course. You know, that's exactly what we would expect. And so I often got trotted out and reeled out in front of clients, not to say anything, but just to sit there, because there was an expectation that, you know, PR execs would look a certain way, and I happened to look that way. But what this agency ghetto, or this kind of velvet ghetto does, is it decreases power, it decreases status for women. And this is something that when I spoke to senior women, they are very mindful of. They're very mindful of the loss of status that can come with these concepts of PR bunny and friendliness trap. So they become self-fulfilling prophecies. They become internalized behaviours. Just a quick word on the methodology, and I wouldn't normally do this in something like this because this is, you know, this could be quite technical, but I think it's important here because I did an ethnographic piece of research, and the ethnography was important because I worked in PR for 10 years. I know this landscape, I know this industry, I understand it. It gave me access, obviously, because I knew plenty of people still running agencies and working in that industry. And until 2022, I was chair of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations in the Midlands. So I had access to plenty of PR agencies to go in and observe. But the other reason why it was important to me was I wanted to see for myself whether anything had changed, whether there was any difference in those workplaces. There are all kinds, I won't go into it today, there are all kinds of problems with it, you know, bracketing off your own experience and all of those sorts of things. But I think actually, why should you? You know, I don't need this to be an objective piece of work in that respect. It's very subjective to me. I lived this and it means something to me, and I wanted to bring these stories and these lived experiences to life. So let's get into it. Acts. So preparation. The pattern that emerged from preparation really was around women preparing themselves to be technically excellent, not preparing themselves to lead, not preparing themselves to be, you know, the thought leader in that area, but just to be technically excellent. So when I talk to people, they focus on things like, oh yeah, I want to do campaign planning training. I'm doing this CIPR course in this, and then next month I'm going to go to a creative writing course. And they were prioritizing the things that would give them the technical expertise, but not the things that would advance their careers. Not the mentorship, not the leadership skills, not the networks. They were focusing on technical competence. I will hasten to say these are all made-up names and made-up people. They don't represent any real people, just in case anybody's tying the fact. I didn't think about this, Louise, before I put it in, but these are completely made-up names of people who work in agencies in the Midlands. But Louise was an account director, which is, in agency terms, a fairly senior role, but it's still a technical role managing clients. It's not leading agencies and leading people in that way. So she had a team of people, but she didn't see herself as a leader. She never once spoke to herself about herself in that way. She wanted to be part of the team. She just wanted everyone to like her, everyone to want to work with her, and she just wanted this fantastic team. At no point did she say, yeah, this is how I lead my team, this is how I manage my... She didn't use the language of leadership and management. Not all women internalise limitations. I think that's really important to note. There is some resistance to this, and there are a couple of key people who stepped out, I think, from this way of thinking. The one lady, Debbie, was an account manager. She was actively seeking mentorship. So she was somebody who was going out there and wanting to find someone who could mentor her, going to every single CIPR event that we ever put on, going to the head office CIPR events as well. You know, there was a lot of effort being put into developing her career and her networks. What I'm interested to see is whether she's pregnant now, this lady, and I'm interested to see how far that continues, or whether that comes to an abrupt stop the moment that she has that baby, like it did for me. And then Joanne was a managing director a very successful managing director of an agency which she'd set up herself. So you would think she is somebody who would lead, and she would be an inspirational example to others. And she positioned herself very much in the PR community as a thought leader. She's got a professional blog. She's got a really active LinkedIn presence. So she did take ownership. One of the things that I haven't done in my career yet, and this is where I need to take it, the research in the next level, is the intersectionality, though, because I think it's really important to note that Joanne is a well-off lady, and she comes from a good middle-class background, and she had, for many years, a nanny until she sent her kids to boarding school. Okay, so she is not typical. Her life, the reason why she was able to position herself and set up her agency in that way is because she had help. She was not raising her children herself. They were away off in a boarding school somewhere. So there are other aspects to this that I didn't explore that could also be explored. You know, what is the intersection of status and class, for instance? The next stage is around performance then. So how are women showing up? How are they performing? What are some of the strategies that they're using? The big one in PR is appearance management. You go into a creative agency and you might see some young guys with jeans and sweatshirts on and maybe hoodies. The women are polished. The women are not there in their sweatpants and their hoodies. They are polished. They've gone in with a full face of makeup. They've straightened their hair. They've got clothing on that they've very carefully chosen. They haven't rocked up in jeans and a hoodie. Very different strategies. And there's nothing written, right? These are just unspoken norms within the industry. Nobody has said, you will dress like this and you will dress like that. But appearance management is very definitely a thing. Communication style. It's not aggressive in any way, very calm, much more focused on listening, much more focused on non-confrontational approaches. They want to try to convey professionalism in everything they do, but in a non-threatening way. They don't want to appear like that they might upset somebody. They're much more collaborative, so they are actually much better at building teams. They tend to organise the after-work drinks, they tend to organise the lunches, they organise the activities. One of the agencies that I went into, the girls all organised a little kind of workout together. They got someone to come in and do yoga classes. This is a bit of a thing in creative industries, those who don't know. You bring in people to do group activities with you, so you bring in your yoga teacher and you have group yoga after work. It was drinks in my day, but it's group yoga now. And they're much more aligned with the organisation. They tend to really buy into that organisation's aims and goals, and they align themselves absolutely with it. So what they're demonstrating is flexibility, agility. They're juggling lots of different things, and they're trying to do so in a manner that's calm and professional and really appearance-driven. But what that does, and what they don't realise it does at that time, is it perpetuates toxic, high-pressure environments. So just to give you an example from my own experience, and this, unfortunately, has also not changed. I worked in an agency called McCann Erickson. I don't know if any of you from comms industry are aware of McCann Erickson. And I worked with a girl called Bran. Our contracts were 9 to 5:30. And I remember clear as day, Bran coming in one day and asking if she could have time off for a dental appointment. When was the dental appointment? 6:30 at night. She didn't need to ask for time off to go to that appointment, but because the expectation was that we were there till 10 o'clock at night, that she felt that she needed to give advance notice and ask for permission to leave early. Wasn't in any way early, but it was just a norm. It was just an expectation. Lots of things like that happened in the 90s, and we just accepted it. It was just the norm. You would work on your client work during the day, and then you would do pitches in the evening. The routine of sleeping sometimes in the agency on the floor because you were working on a pitch till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and the agency head would order in pizza or order in Chinese, and you just sat there until you'd got it finished. There was also quite a heavy drinking culture in public relations in the 1990s, and it was expected. You were expected to drink because you had to go out with a client, and you had to do whatever the client wanted to do and take the client wherever they wanted to go, even if you didn't want to go. Even if you were tired and you just wanted to go home and have a bath, you couldn't. The expectations were high. And so you get these really toxic environments that it's not until you step out, it wasn't until I left and went and did something else that I realised how toxic it was. It was just so intense. And I think it's quite notable that, my two best friends now are people that I met working in agencies in the 90s, because it was very difficult to sustain friendships outside of your working life. You basically became best buddies with the people you work with. There was no time or space to do anything else or see anybody else. I've kind of preempted this slide, haven't I? So some of the challenges that we navigate, or women navigate in public relations, are around balancing that assertiveness with likability. So how do you stand your ground? How do you say, look, I'm the expert here, this is what you need to do, and remain likable at the same time, and tick all the boxes so that you don't get shunned, so you stay within your accepted behaviour patterns. The gender biases and stereotypes also influence perceptions of competence. If you become too likable, if you're too friendly, well, can you actually do your job then? So you get these perceptions of competence. And then you get the high-pressure norms that prioritise work over personal life. So like I say, your friendship groups end up being the people you work with because there's no time or space for anything else. And then you have the managing the scepticism from the clients and the media about expertise. And I don't know if there are any journalists in the room. There's ex-journalists, I think, in the room. But the journalist PR tension has been there for many decades. And a lot of the negative stereotypes that exist around communications, public relations work come from the media. The other interesting thing about media representations is if you look at women in PR roles that are represented in the media, they're all fluffy. Samantha from she's not Absolutely Fabulous, she's from Sex and the City, and then the Absolute Fabulous ladies, and Sliding Doors, for anyone who's old enough to remember Gwyneth Paltrow and Sliding Doors. They had fluffy PR roles. They were doing consumer stuff. They were drinking all the time. They were out partying. If you look at male representations in comms, they're political wheeler dealers. Wag the Dog and In the Loop. These are people who've got high-powered roles, who are they're kind of manipulating stories in the background. They're doing much more dark but interesting and high-profile work. So even media representations reinforce the way that women are seen and therefore add to the scepticism about their expertise. And then finally, reception. There are lots of stereotypes that feed into this. So the stereotype about women being good at relationship building feeds into client representations, right? So clients then are happy for the women to go and do the journalism stuff and set things up for them because they're the relationship builders, but they want the men to pitch the strategy. They want the men to sit down and talk budget. Societal perceptions, the reinforcement of traditional gender roles. And that feeds into the toxicity. You know, why do a lot of women not reach leadership roles in PR? Well, because they have children, they have families, and then they leave. Because it's not a career that is actually, particularly agency, it's not friendly to families and to women. And then the industry perceptions, so the barriers that women face within the industry itself. You know, despite the fact that it's a female-dominated velvet ghetto, women are still not reaching the top in the numbers that they should be in 2025, and that is absolutely shocking. So some key insights from my research so far. There is a performance-person tension. So we're constantly negotiating who we are authentically, our authentic self with our performed self, you know, the performances that we have to put on. We're constantly self-regulating. We're self-regulating so that we don't step outside of the boundaries that have been established for us. And this blooming velvet ghetto won't go anywhere. You know, it just won't go anywhere, and has actually led to the entire industry, PR and communications, being stuck at a technical level and not actually reaching a strategic level. And if you just take a cursory glance at any LinkedIn page associated with a senior comms person, you know, they will all be bemoaning the fact that they don't have a table, seat at the table, and that they're not in the C-suite. And you see lots of things, you know, around that rhetoric that are all over the industry. And part of the reason for that is because it's become a velvet ghetto. They're not taken seriously. It's technical work. It's not C-suite work. It is here, I would like to point out. We're the exception that proves the rule. And so the theoretical contribution I hope I'm making is around the 3-act framework, which I think gives us an analytical lens for critique, but also some practical implications for how do we get beyond this then? Because, you know, it all sounds pretty bleak, but I think there are some things we can do to get beyond it. So implications moving forward, I think there are implications for practitioners and for organisations. There are things we can do. We can have mindful preparation. We can think about mentorship. We can reach out to people. We can be aware of ourselves and the way that we're behaving and the way we're limiting ourselves and becoming self-critical. And we can actually think about our own well-being and not buy into the toxic environments. I have to say, you know, this latest generation, Gen Z, are giving me a lot of hope because they're not buying into some of the toxic work patterns that we just took as read in the 1990s. You know, we fully accepted that to get on your career, to show that you were committed, to show that you were excellent, you needed to be at your desk for at least 10 hours a day, and you need to be focused on. They don't buy into that. You know, if they can get their work done in 5 hours and then go off and do something fun, that's what they want to do. And I think it will change, but it's not going to change fast, unfortunately. For organisations, structural change. You know, move beyond the performative benefits to actual meaningful policies. For an industry dominated by women, flexible working is almost non-existent. You know, there's lots of performative stuff, and you see it in, you know, you see it in representations in the media, but it's true of, oh, we've got this fun little, you know, relaxing room, and we'll give you a free gym membership so you can go and do these things, but we're not actually going to stop you from working 10 hours a day. You've still got to do that, but if you do get a bit of free time, here's a Virgin membership to go to a health club. So it's moving beyond performative to something that actually will make a difference. Create leadership pathways. Accept that there's a problem, firstly, and create those pathways to leadership that women need. And then the culture shift. I mean, this is a big one, and this is not an easy one, and it's not going to happen overnight, but challenging those toxic norms around behaviour in the industry, which actually damage everybody in the industry, not just women. These ideas of overwork and thriving on chaos. You know, we've got to move beyond that. this is the point in a lecture where I would be putting up some points of reflection and we'd all be talking, but these are more points of reflection for me. And these are kind of where I'm thinking of taking things next, and will feed into the next book and the next piece of work that I'm doing. So just on that, just by way of closure, these are the two of the projects that I'm working on at the moment. The first of them is a research methods book. How exciting. Everybody loves a research methods book. But we're actually going to be doing, myself with Liz, our colleague Sarah, who's up at Northumbria University, and Heather, who was Bournemouth, but she's freelance now. We're actually going to look at alternative qualitative research methods for communications and public relations. We are publishing that with Routledge. And the little QR code there is if anybody has anything to contribute. So we're really interested in learning about participatory research methods, experiential research methods, qualitative research methods in other areas that might inform practice in public relations. So from the arts, from health, from other areas. If you're interested in contributing a chapter, quite a short deadline because we're publishing in the spring, but if you can have a chapter written by the end of February, then we're really interested to hear from you. And if you scan that QR code, that takes you to our little microsite and you can see where to send the details. And then we've also just signed a contract for the second edition, more women's work in public relations, which will come out in 2027 now. So if anybody's got any stories, and I've already coerced Louise into contributing to the book, but if anybody would like to contribute to that book again, just let me know. And then just thank you. Thank you for listening. Sorry that I think I've overshot my time by quite a lot, so I apologise for that. And again, if you're interested in finding out any more about me and my work, then you can scan that QR code, which is a different one. Thank you.